Good morning, church family. I want to tell you a story about Joe and Sam, both 90 years old, best friends, and lifelong baseball fans. One afternoon, Joe and Sam were at a game, and right about the fifth inning, Joe turns and says, "Sam, do you think there's baseball in heaven?" Sam thinks about this for a moment. Finally, he replies, "I'll tell you what, let's make a promise. Whichever one of us should die first, let's somehow promise to get a message to the other to let them know if there's baseball in heaven." Well, both friends, they agree. And about 6 months later, Sam passes away. After the funeral, Joe is missing his best friend and thinking of him fondly. He begins to retire for the evening, lays down in bed, closes his eyes, and just then, he hears a voice crying, "Joe! Joe!" He sits up, opens his eyes, and says, "Sam, is that you?" He replies, "Yes, Joe, it's me. I've got good news and bad news." "Well, what is it, my friend? Tell me." "Well, the good news is there's baseball in heaven, and oh, Joe, it's the best. Every game is just the best game ever." "Well, that's great to hear. What could be bad about that?" And his friend replies, "Well, I went ahead and looked at the lineup, and you're pitching this Friday." Now, I'm not sure that any of that is really bad news, but I think it goes without saying that we hear a lot of bad news these days. So why not share some good news? Because good news is always worth sharing. So I did a little research this week, and I looked up some of the top good news stories from this past year. And I found a lot that I didn't know. So I want to share it with you guys today. First of all, of course, we know that COVID vaccines were approved and made available all over the world. But did you also know that so was, for the first time, a life-saving vaccine for malaria as well? Let's see, in climate news, for the first time in Europe, renewable energy sources generated more power than fossil fuels. I thought that was amazing. In politics, of course, we know that a woman was elected vice president for the first time in the United States. But did you know that women were elected to the highest office all over the world this past year? In Estonia, Honduras, Samoa, Sweden, Tanzania, and India, all elected women to lead their nations for the first time. It's amazing. In conservation news, tuna, Siberian tigers, and European bison were all headed for extinction, but by 2021, these species were thriving once again. And in sports, well, Tom Brady threw for a career-high passing yards and touchdowns for your Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Like I said, good news is always worth sharing, and that's exactly what Jesus does today in our gospel lesson. After all, gospel means good news. So in Luke chapter 4, starting at verse 18, Jesus is standing before the congregation, and he says this: "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he has anointed me to bring good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim the release of the captives and recovery of sight to the blind, and to let the oppressed go free, and to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor." Friends, that is good news for you and good news for everyone. So this year, if anybody tries to tell you some bad news, I hope you'll share some good news that you hear here in church, because good news is always worth sharing. Amen.